Yeghia Tashjian, thank you very much for accepting my invitation on Syriana analysis. It's always a pleasure to have you on my channel, especially after your last article, which was published a few days ago. And I think it's very important. And for also my followers, they have to go and read it in length. I will put the link of the article in the description below. The title of the article is Iran and the Second Artsakh War. Has Tehran lost its leverage over South Caucasus? So I will start with the introduction that you already wrote. When it comes to the South Caucasus, Iran is historically and geographically one of the crucial regional actors alongside Russia and Turkey. To assert its influence in the Nagorno-Karabakh-Artsakh conflict, Tehran had even offered to mediate between Armenia and Azerbaijan on various occasions, but her efforts were not successful due to the lack of interest of the conflicting parties. Here, the question is, was this lack of interest due to Iran's minimum influence in the Southern Caucasus or over Nagorno-Karabakh compared to Russia, or is there any other reason for that?
First of all, thank you, Kevork. Yes, of course, to some extent. I mean, if we go back to history, for example, before the liberation of Shushi in 1992, Tehran actually tried to mediate between the both sides, fearing that the war would spill over the Iranian territories. And back then, some actually Iranian or radical Iranians, they tried, for example, attack the Armenian embassy. They made a protest because they viewed the conflict from pure religious perspective. I'm saying this in 1992. However, after the pan-Turkish announcements regarding that northern Iran is part of Azerbaijan, especially coming from Azerbaijani president back then, so the Iranians started to shift their official position. But their mediation also failed because since, first of all, Russia was the main deal broker in the region. And actually, the same happened in 2020. Both sides were not interested to hand the conflict resolution to Iran. This was also unacceptable for Russia, Turkey, and also the West, because as we know that US and France as the members of the Minsk co-chairs.
Yeghia, but you also said that Tehran has been suspicious of Baku's links with Tel Aviv, which is Iran's arch enemy in the region. However, the recent war limited Iran's options, as Tehran could not intervene in the conflict in favor of Armenia, out of concern that this would antagonize Turkey, which was directly involved in the war. But don't you think Tehran's policy of not antagonizing Turkey has cost the former, cost Tehran a lot, especially in Syria and in Nagorno-Karabakh?
Yes, definitely it was a risky, very risky choice for Iran. But let's think of otherwise. If you are aware that, for example, Armenia was being defeated, and from international law perspective, unfortunately, these territories were part of Azerbaijan. I'm talking the adjacent territories of Nagorno-Karabakh. So then how come you side with Yerevan? Moreover, Yerevan was being isolated politically. Even Russia didn't directly intervene in favor of Armenian side. So how come Iran takes such a military risk and clash with Azerbaijan and Turkey? That's also questionable. There are also other factors. For example, the cheating of Iranian Azeris for the advancements of the Azerbaijani army in Artsakh. So this was to some extent related to the growth of Turkish influence in South Caucasus. And from the Iranian perspective, any prolongation of the war would have a spillover effect and give the Western power, especially the USA, the pretext to use the Azeri card to destabilize northern Iran. So for this, Iran welcomed the outcome and joined with the winning side to gain a share from the spoils of war, irrespective of the outcome.
Yeah, I clearly agree with you in many of the ideas that you already mentioned now. However, when we talk about international law, for example, even Israel, according to international law, should have some parts of Palestine, for example, but Iran doesn't accept that. Yes. So in my opinion, international law is not the first consideration for Iran. Maybe the other factors that you mentioned are very important, but in my opinion, it's also when we come, like you also in your article, you rightly mentioned that Azerbaijan and Israel enjoy very good relations, and Tel Aviv perceives Baku as an advanced territory to spy on Tehran. But however, given the official position of Iran, it looks to me, at least, if as if the latter, as if Iran is shooting its own feet. I mean, do you agree with me in this evaluation?
To some extent, yes. And actually, before writing my article, I interviewed many Iranian scholars and junior policymakers and tried to discuss and debate this issue with them. There were diverse opinions. I mean, to some extent, yes, you are right. And now Israel can spy over Iran through the newly captured territories by Azerbaijan. And already it's interesting that Baku is building an airport in Fizuli, which is very, very close to Iran. And Iran has been always suspicious of, let's say, Israel's intention in Azerbaijan. Because if you go back to history, for example, there have been recent high-ranking official meetings between Azerbaijan and Israel, during which actually the both sides signed economic, security, military agreements. Moreover, Israel used Azerbaijan as an intelligence base to spy on Iranian military activities, and this was seen during the before the nuclear deal that was done in 2015. There were a lot of accusations by Iran against Azerbaijan that you're letting your bases so that the Israelis can spy on us. And actually, what is interesting that Azerbaijan was one of the first countries to buy Israeli long-range, precise, and technical kamikaze drones. Yes. And in 2016, when Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu he visited Baku, he revealed that actually the Azerbaijanis bought weapons worth of $5 billion. So this was true. Somehow shocking, especially also for the Iranians.
This is the declared numbers, by the way, Yeghia. These are what they declare in media. We don't know what's under the table.
Yes, especially during the war, there were a lot of, for example, we were trying to track military cargo planes coming from Israel to Azerbaijan. So there was a lot of purchase of advanced weapons. And after these developments, we can say that, yes, there are some alarms being raised in Iran, and because strong Azerbaijan under Israeli influence is a threat to Iran's national security and also to territorial integrity.
That's very true, Yeghia. What you said is really important, and I hope if there are decision makers also in Tehran are watching, they would consider what you said. You also mentioned, Yeghia, in your article that the return of Azerbaijani control over the border with Iran creates additional opportunities for direct interaction between Azeris in Iran, which consists of 25% of Iran's population and that of the Republic of Azerbaijan. Do you say this as a positive factor for Iran, or do you think Azerbaijan has now more leverage over Iran with the help of Israel?
No. Now Turkey and Azerbaijan are trying to expand actually their influence over even northern Iran. And here I like to just make a small note that not all Iranian Azeris are pro-Azerbaijan. Because recently we saw that few numbers of Iranian Azeris, they protested against Armenia, and this was very limited. But with the outbreak of the wars, especially in late September, demonstrations erupted in Azeri majority cities in Iran, demanding an active support for the ethnic kin on the side of the border. So the war had already fueled a sense of Azerbaijan nationalism inside northern Iran. We see, for example, I don't know why, Khamenei's pictures were burned, yes, and so on. So this was somehow surprising. Even he was ethnically, I think, from his father's side, he's an Azeri. This is very interesting, for example. Tehran also feared it would be dragged into the Armenian-Azerbaijani war. Meanwhile, the return of Azerbaijani control over the border with Iran creates an additional opportunities, as you said, that for direct interaction between the Iranian Azeris and the Azeris in Azerbaijan. And this is interesting because Aliyev's first trip to the newly captured territories included the visit of Khudavarim Bridge, which is an ancient historical bridge that connects the both sides. So this, I mean, and the raising of Azerbaijani flag there, it was a very symbolic, and there was like all the Azerbaijani media were there. So from the Iranian perspective, it was like, okay, things are not going very well here. Yes. And so Tehran knew the symbolism of this ceremony, which seemed to also generate enthusiasm among Azeris in Iran. And for this reason, Iranian officials and diplomats took a pro-Azerbaijani stance in public. And it was not surprising that even the Iranian supreme leader made an announcement saying that Karabakh is a land of Islam, and congratulate Azerbaijan for liberating its
Yes.
territories and so on. So Iran tried to justify its policy from a religious perspective in
Yes.
order to push aside any nationalist movement by Iranian Azeris. And adding on this, on December 10, we know that Erdogan, he cited a poem when there was a military parade in Baku. So the Iranians were alarmed because this poem was directly related to the so-called division of historic Azerbaijan. Let's say it was the Persian Empire, not Azerbaijan. So the geopolitical results of the, let's say, the Armenian-Azerbaijani war set off a discussion to some extent in Iran on its foreign policy towards its neighbors in the light of what Tehran perceived a serious geopolitical setback. So many Iranian junior officials criticized Tehran's passive position towards the conflict, arguing that now Israel actually is in our border.
Like when we say they are 20%, 25% of the Iranians are Azeris, and when Tehran is playing the Islamic card here, so in your opinion, they are trying to marginalize the nationalist factor in this regard, right?
Yes, because the Iranian Azeris are actually very well integrated in the Iranian society.
Okay, so Iran also warned during the war in Nagorno-Karabakh about the presence of the Syrian mercenaries, or those who Erdogan transferred them from Syria into Nagorno-Karabakh in order to fight against the Armenians. Do you think these terrorists could be resettled, like permanently in Nagorno-Karabakh, or maybe to be used later against Iran in any potential, let's say, foreign invasion against Iran?
The statement made by the Iranian officials regarding the presence of the Syrian terrorists and the mercenaries in Nagorno-Karabakh was very soft. I mean, compared to the statements that were made, for example, towards Syria. So what I was surprised that Iranians intervened in Syria, far away from their border, under the pretext of there was a radical mujahideens and so on. But they took a passive stance when it comes to Nagorno-Karabakh. What they did is that sending reinforcements towards in order to solidify, let's say, their northern border.
Yes.
I mean, I wrote on my Facebook wall during about this issue that I fear in the future the Turkoman mercenaries would be resettled in these territories. And this can be actually a Turkish project because their aim would be to surround Iran from the north with Turkic tribes. But however, on the other hand, when I was trying to interview and contact with journalists there, they were insisting that no, all these mercenaries, they have returned back to Syria because their contract expired after 3 months. But I mean, what we had seen in Libya and Nagorno-Karabakh, who can guarantee that in the future these mercenaries will not be used against Iran or even against Russia? So especially, let's not forget the sectarian factor would be very strong. For example, mobilization force when it comes to using these mercenaries against Iran, because there is a sectarian factor and what is happening in the Middle East. So actually such a plan would attract thousands of mujahideens and mercenaries to fight against Iran, and not just from Syria, but also Central Asia and beyond. I mean, for this purpose, what I have also proposed that there should be a counter-terrorism center where Iran, Russia, Armenia can cooperate, but also India and China, because they are indirectly also will be threatened by these mercenaries in the future, especially in Uyghur, in the Uyghur case, and also in Kashmir when it comes to India.
We are talking about serious issues now, but I want to mention here a funny thing, like these mercenaries who are so sectarian and they hate the Shias, therefore they want to fight against Iran in any war or in any conflict, but at the same time, they were fighting alongside the Shia Azerbaijani army against the Christian Armenian forces. So this is like the pure definition of a mercenary who is fighting the war of others just in exchange for some money.
And
they didn't receive.
Yeah, and most of them were not aware. Yes, and most of them were not aware that they were going to fight besides the Shias against the Christians.
They discovered that when they arrived in Nagorno-Karabakh. Yeah, my last question to you is, you mentioned an argument in your article, and you said that the current ceasefire agreement between Artsakh and Azerbaijan will hurt Iran's economic interests. Can you please elaborate a little bit about this idea?
As we know that, yes, Tehran has welcomed the end of hostilities in Artsakh, regardless of the outcome, as I said. However, one should note that the Iranian leaders were until now, they are cautious and worried because Tehran felt ignored by both Ankara and Moscow in setting the post-war security arrangement in South Caucasus. So there was an interesting article in Tehran Times, and it raised a very crucial question saying that why did the leaders of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia decide to keep Iran in dark about the ceasefire agreement while Iran shares long border with both sides, that is Armenia and Azerbaijan. So the Iranians feel somehow betrayed. So with limited options, Iran's passive diplomacy in the recent war caused it to lose important transit role in the region. Because as we know that before the war, any transit or like pipelines or cargo transportation from Turkey to Azerbaijan or vice versa was passing through Nakhichevan. According to this statement or agreement, let's say, now it will be passed from southern Armenia, maybe from the Meghri region. So the Iranians are kept out of all this agreement and they will lose a lot of profit from this project, let's say, or the initiative. Now that Turkey has established to some extent itself in the region and Israel through this war has succeeded to some extent, we can say, politically isolating Iran, not just economically. So Tehran is concerned about being economically now isolated too. Iranian state-sponsored media, they have already warned that Iran would face commercial losses from the arrangement of control of border areas. I mean, until now, for example, land connections, as I said, are made from Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan ex-Lev, which is bordering Turkey, is passing through the Iranian territory. So the new route will diminish Iran's image of being regional transit and its leverage over Nakhichevan, that is leverage on Azerbaijan. So Iran will not have any influence on Azerbaijan because now the Iranians are the ones who are exporting or pumping gas and oil to Nakhichevan. But according to this arrangement, the Iranians will not be able because Azerbaijan will be able to send pipelines or cargo transportation or any energy necessity to Nakhichevan and not Iran. Meanwhile, the Central Asian market will be opened in front of Turkey via Armenia and not Iran. So again, Iran also lost its leverage on Turkey. So from also geopolitical and geoeconomic perspective, I mean, Iran has lost valuable leverage over Azerbaijan and Turkey in the region. Turkey will be in a better position regarding the east-west or west-east transit and the economic routes. That said, Iran is already trying to come from to at least gain some positive outcomes. That is why the Iranian foreign minister, he visited Turkey, Azerbaijan, Russia, Armenia, and Georgia, because as we know that a few weeks ago, Erdogan, he came up with economic framework saying that 3+3, that is the South Caucasian countries plus Iran, Turkey, and Russia can come up with economic activities and so on. So the Iranians were happy about it, that, okay, we can have a shale or something from the spoil. That still, we are not sure, because the problem is that, I mean, there are serious questions that I have also raised in my article that, okay, politically and economically, Iran is being defeated, let's say, to some extent. So here remains the ambiguity is that how can Iran change its loss to a benefit? And what is clear that Tehran has lost its average over the region during the war. It may feel pressure to consolidate its relations to Armenia, but this is also related or dependent what the Armenian government will do, because the Armenian government is now very passive. It's not taking any initiative. For example, when in December 10, Erdogan tried to cite his poem, the Armenian government was completely silent. I was very surprised about that. So at the same time, the Iranians are also aware that they cannot antagonize Turkey because they have arrangements when it comes to fighting against the PKK and so on. But the Iranians, maybe Iran's due calculation may be dependent on the future geopolitical shifts in the country. That is depends on Russia's initiative, what the Russians will do. So what the Russians will do, I think the Iranians will do to some extent. They will take same steps if they will try to clash with the Turks or not. So it depends on the Russian initiative. For now, I can say that Iran would be favoring the current status quo with certain amendments, maybe economic gains in the future. But as I said, everything is dependent on Russian initiative.
Yeah, this was a very good discussion with you. It was short but comprehensive, and it covers a lot of important geopolitical, geoeconomic issues in the Southern Caucasus and in Eastern Anatolia and the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And it's very important for the people to understand these details, because this is not going to be the end of this conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, and there could be other conflicts, whether military or economic conflicts among these players in the region. And guys, if you want to follow the work of Yeghia Tashjian and what is he writing and posting, I will put his Twitter account in the description. And also, if you're new, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'm also bringing a lot of information from Syria and in different geopolitical conflicts and affairs around the world. And lastly, you can become my patron and buy me a coffee per month in order to support independent journalism and the independent work that I'm doing and delivering information and analysis and commentaries to you, in order to create some sort of a balance with the mainstream media that is totally biased towards one side. Yeghia Tashjian, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevork.